Hello YouTubers, Alaska Prepper here. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a little bit rusty, but this is something that I really want to go over with you all. No, it's not doom and gloom, but it is reality. So thank you very much to the community member that sent me this article. And it is not really intel, but it is actionable knowledge. Why? Because eventually, ladies and gentlemen, if you transact in dollars, if you live in the United States especially, you will have to find a way to make do with those dollars buying you a lot less than what they buy you today. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I understand that after I came back after taking about a month off or so, I've been talking a lot about the dollar. And it's because, in my opinion, it is the biggest threat that we face right now. I don't think that the biggest threat that we face is nuclear war. I honestly don't. I don't think that we're going to have an Armageddon or a Mad Max like some people say we will have. Maybe eventually we will throughout history, right? But I don't think that right now in the near future or even in the next 10, 15 years that we're going to have any kind of Mad Max. But I do believe that the dollar will affect every single person in the world, especially those that are forced to use it, like us here in the United States of America. So that's why I'm talking about this, because we need to be educated and we need to understand what the repercussions will be if we do, as the U.S., lose the Federal Reserve note, i.e. the U.S. dollar, as the world reserve currency. Now, I've seen some other people on YouTube that are very, very good economists. They know what they're talking about, and they themselves say that there's no way that the dollar will lose the world reserve currency because there's too much need for it around the world. However, ladies and gentlemen, I just have to, disagree with that. Some people out there are saying it will take decades and decades before the dollar loses the world reserve currency. Well, maybe it won't. Maybe some other countries will do bilateral trading like they are starting to do now. Maybe there will be another reserve currency. Maybe the dollar will still be the reserve currency just on paper, just by name only. And other countries are stopping the usage of the dollar and doing bilateral trading, meaning that the dollar will lose a lot of its purchasing power for those of us that have to use it. So these are the things that I like to see or look out into the future and say, how can this affect us here in the United States? And how can it affect you where you live, the country that you live in? I know that there's a few countries, I think 5 or 6 of them, that actually use the Federal Reserve note as the money or the currency of trading in their country, the legal tender currency in their country. So it will definitely affect them as well. It will also affect countries that are actually pegged to the dollar. Right? But when I see that the BRICS Plus nations, along with all of the other countries that are wanting to join the BRICS nations, including France, of all countries, right? That's talking about partnering with China. When I see that, it tells me that the possibility of the U.S. maybe not losing the reserve currency of the world status, maybe not losing it, but the dollar losing most of its purchasing power, or most of the purchasing power that it still has, is a real possibility. So that's one of the things that I think we should be preparing for, is for a day when the dollar will buy you almost nothing compared to what it buys you now. I mean, look at it this way, ladies and gentlemen. If you compare what the dollar can buy you today against what it could buy you back in 1913 when it first came out, the Federal Reserve note. If you compare what it can buy you today based on what it could buy you back in 1913, what is it? About 2%? The dollar in the last 110 years or so has lost about 97.5%, 98% of its purchasing power. So how is it that some people say, well, that can't happen? Well, it's already happened. It's just that the first time it happened in slow motion. It took 110 years or so for it to lose 98% of its purchasing power. And this next time around, we only have 2% to work with. So it's probably going to happen a little faster this time around. The past few weeks, major countries have been moving away from the dollar, raising doubts about the dollar's long dominant role in the world. 8 weeks ago, it was just pariah nations like Iran or Russia trying to de-dollarize. Now it's Brazil, France, even Saudi Arabia. the linchpin of the decades-long petrodollar arrangement. You all know that back in, I believe it was 2021 August, Saudi Arabia contracted with Russia in a similar contract that they did with us in 1972-73. And now they pretty much broken the contract with us and went with Russia. And Saudi Arabia is the one that pretty much decides whether the petrodollar will exist or not. Petrodollar being the main reason why the U.S. Federal Reserve note, or the U.S. dollar, is the world reserve currency. And I was pretty surprised to hear that France is now looking at de-dollarizing as well by doing bilateral trades with China. And Brazil, I wasn't too surprised about that. But what we're seeing here is we're seeing the allies of the United States of America getting on board to de-dollarize. Now listen to this, ladies and gentlemen. We were talking about Saudi Arabia, how they contracted with Russia, and now they're contracting with China. In late March, Saudi Arabia announced that it will price oil in yuan. Even CNN was worried, and in a rare display of situational awareness, Fox fretted about a Weimar hyperinflationary event. The dollar has been the undisputed global reserve currency since 1940. Reserve currency status looks great on paper. You get to print stacks of green paper, and foreigners give you cool stuff for it, like toasters, luxury cars, and copper mines. The problem is, who profits? Who gets paid when foreigners crave the green paper? So who really does get paid, ladies and gentlemen, when foreigners crave the Federal Reserve notes that are printed here in the United States? Some people would say, well, it's the people of the United States that get paid. We're the ones that make the money. But no, it's not. It's the entity that prints those dollars and the people that entity wants to succeed. All right, so it's the Federal Reserve, the banks, and the cronies of the banksters. They're the ones who succeed. And of course, the ones who write the laws. But let's see what they say. Unfortunately, it's not the American people. It's whoever prints the money. The Fed, meaning the Treasury, to whom they hand their ill-gotten profits. And, you guessed it, Wall Street and commercial banks. To see why, imagine foreigners didn't want dollars, right? So imagine that foreigners didn't want any dollars. The Fed and banks could only print a little bit, since printing a lot would create inflation and voters will then toss them out. So if foreigners didn't want our dollars, then how are politicians going to buy votes, ladies and gentlemen? Think about that. But if foreigners want large numbers of dollars, the Fed and banks can print a matching amount. It's like a river flowing into the money supply reservoir, matched up with a river flowing out to foreigners. The reservoir stays nice and stable, and voters don't riot. Why? Because what we're doing is we are exporting inflation. Instead of printing the money and leaving it all here, we are printing it, sending it out of our borders, and bringing in plastic stuff that's made outside of our borders. Therefore, that inflationary event is not going to happen in the United States because those dollars were sent outside of our borders. But when countries stop wanting to interact with US dollars, where are they going to send those dollars back to? The only country that has to accept them, here in the United States of America. Here it says, enter Weimar. Now, here is the problem. What if foreigners suddenly don't want dollars? Maybe China's paying them to sell oil in yuan, or maybe the Fed lost the plot and creates too much inflation. Demand dries up, the dollar starts to lose value, and we've been seeing that lately. And foreigners start to worry that their life savings in corporate treasuries are melting. They sell out of dollars, a little at first, and then more and more as it accelerates. And then they say, now that the river to foreigners reverses, it flows back into the reservoir, the dollar collapses, and 70 years of Fed and Wall Street money printing comes rushing back like a tsunami running up a canyon. We are talking about double-digit inflation for multiple years at a minimum. Think about all of the money that has been created and has been exported outside of our borders coming back in to our country in a short term, ladies and gentlemen. It's going to create inflation like we've never, ever experienced before. All right? What are the stages of de-dollarization? So what happens if the dollar falls? Right here they're saying if it falls, not fails, right? Because it doesn't necessarily have to fail. It can still be a dollar. It's just not going to be able to buy you the same stuff. For starters, foreigners don't need as many dollars, meaning there are extra dollars that nobody wants out there. This makes the price of the dollar fall and it gets weaker, meaning it can buy you less and less. And it's usually slow at first, ladies and gentlemen, but it does pick up speed. This is because the first ones out only lose a little bit of value, but the longer they wait, the more value that they will lose. And who's left holding the bag as the dollar becomes increasingly worthless? Americans. That is why, ladies and gentlemen, this is actionable knowledge. Because if you know that the Federal Reserve note, there's a fake one by the way, if you know that the Federal Reserve notes that you have worked for are going to lose their value, what would you do? Me, I'm not a financial advisor, but I would say turn this stuff into real stuff. Turn this fake stuff into real stuff. Because you see, I think that most Americans at heart know that this is worthless. Most Americans know that this is worthless, but they concede to the fact that this has been made legal tender by law, by edict, by the government. And they say, well, what else am I going to use? And this has always worked. So they keep hanging on to this. And they keep using this, but the more of this that you have in the bank, the more of this that you have under your mattress, the more that you are going to lose when it gets devalued to the point where you don't even want to spend it anymore, where maybe you need a scale in order to weigh the money because you need so much of it in order to purchase something, just like we saw here and are still seeing more than likely over in Venezuela and, of course, Weimar Republic. So Americans have no choice, ladies and gentlemen, just like I explained, because it's by law. And unless we swap our dollars for real stuff, and here they say for gold or Bitcoin or goats, then you will go down with the ship when the dollar finally falls. What happens to those Americans? A failing dollar drives up the price of everything that comes into America. Like I described or explained, I believe it was our last video that I talked about this too, that a failing dollar will make the prices of all of the things that are imported go up. But it also drives up the price of anything traded on the world markets. And the first to jump will be gasoline, heating oil, and food prices. All of those are in the world market. All of those things are priced in the world market, along with prescription medications, ladies and gentlemen. Everything is going to go up. It seems like, a lot of the things that I talked about in our last video is, here. I was saying this exact same thing. Indeed, this is more or less true for every consumer product. Not that only China dominates, but anyone that imports to us does. We shot ourselves in the foot, and now it's coming back to bite us. Next, those expensive commodities and input prices pour out through the supply chain, yanking prices up in industry after industry, cars, construction materials like steel or concrete, clothes, furniture, TVs, computers, and medical devices. Gone are the days of affordable luxuries. Now you got to work for them. About 40% of American stocks are owned by foreigners, and 1/3 of corporate bonds are owned by foreigners. So if foreigners start to see the American dollar, the Federal Reserve note, as failing, they're going to get rid of their stocks because their stocks are denominated in US dollars. And what's going to happen to the stock market when we have 40% of stocks that are owned by foreigners? What's going to happen to the stock market? What's going to happen to all those pension funds that are vested in the stock market? What's going to happen to the treasuries? All right, the treasury notes. And what's going to happen to all of those pension funds also that have treasuries in their accounts? Let's see, what else does it say here? This could cut your 401ks almost in half, and it could drive up borrowing costs for companies to impossible levels. There are ways to stop this, but given the Washington clown show to raise the debt ceiling, yes again, paired with their obsession with sanctions that scare foreign countries off the dollar, Washington isn't remotely close to the serious thinking it will take to right this ship. Pretty much they're saying there that this is not going to be fixed by Washington, because Washington is going to continue to raise the debt ceiling, right? And they're going to continue to use the dollar as a weapon. Right? Pretty much is what they're saying. Losing reverse currency status would savage the American economy, and it would savage the American people. No country needs reserve currency status after all. It doesn't benefit the people. But like climbing a cliffside with no gear, once you go halfway up, you better not let go. And ladies and gentlemen, I have to agree 100% that there's no country that needs reserve currency status. Why? Why can't we just trade bilaterally with country A and country B? There's really no reason why we need a reserve currency of the world. The only real reserve currency that we can actually use in the world is gold. It's gold. It's the real money that can be used throughout the world, that can be used by every country, that we can have a common denominator as to what money is used to do trade around the world. It's gold or silver. Right? It's a lot easier than trying to use commodities as a reserve currency, like let's say wheat or something like that, right? Gold and silver never changes. It cannot be destroyed. It cannot be created from thin air. It keeps every party honest. All right, I hope you got something out of this, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that you're proud of me. I didn't get excited or anything like that. You need to consider prepping for the end of when the dollar is going to buy you what it buys you now, or when it's going to buy you a fraction. And when I say a fraction, I mean 1 or 2% of what it buys you now. It's happened before. It will happen again. So go ahead and prepare for that, because I see it happening. Having said that, I hope that you have a great day. God bless every one of you. God bless America. I'm Alaska Prepper. I am out.